I never thought a single moment could unravel 8 years of marriage. But there I was at 2 a.m., tangled up on my own couch with someone who definitely wasn't my husband. The wine had been flowing all evening. The party guests had finally left, and Jonah Feld, my husband's charming coworker, had offered to help clean up. What started as innocent conversation had somehow evolved into something much more dangerous. "You know, Opaline," Jonah whispered, his arm draped casually around my shoulders. "Eliot doesn't appreciate what he has. You're brilliant, funny, beautiful, and he treats you like furniture." I should have moved away, should have thanked him for the compliment and sent him home. Instead, I leaned into his warmth, intoxicated by the attention I'd been craving for months. Eliot had been so distant lately, buried in his software projects, barely acknowledging my existence, except to discuss household logistics or our 7-year-old daughter Lyra's school schedule. "He used to see me," I murmured, allowing myself to get lost in Jonah's dark eyes. "When we first met, he couldn't get enough of me. Now I feel invisible." "His loss," Jonah said softly, his fingers tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. The silk dress I'd worn to the party had shifted during our conversation, and I hadn't bothered to adjust it. "Any man who ignores a woman like you is a fool." The rational part of my brain screamed warnings, but the neglected wife in me was starving for this kind of validation. When Jonah's face moved closer to mine, when his lips were just inches away, I didn't pull back. I told myself it was harmless flirtation, that Eliot was at his tech conference until morning, that no one would ever know. That's when the headlight swept across our living room window. My heart stopped. Jonah froze, his arms still around me, our faces still dangerously close. The familiar rumble of Eliot's Honda Civic filled the silence as he pulled into our apartment complex's parking lot. I scrambled to sit up straight, but it was too late. The front door was already opening. Eliot stood silhouetted in the doorway, his conference bag slung over his shoulder, his usually neat brown hair disheveled from travel. His green eyes took in the scene with methodical precision, the empty wine glasses on the coffee table, Jonah's jacket draped over the armchair, my flushed face and wrinkled dress, the intimate space between us on the couch. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. "Conference ended early," Eliot said finally, his voice eerily calm. He set down his bag with deliberate care, never taking his eyes off us. "Budget cuts. They cancelled the morning sessions." "Eliot," I jumped up, smoothing my dress, trying to inject normalcy into my voice. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow. Jonah was just helping me clean up after the party." Jonah stood as well, running a hand through his dark hair. "Hey, man. Yeah, the party was great. Your wife really knows how to throw a celebration." The celebration had been for my promotion to senior HR coordinator, a milestone Eliot had acknowledged with a distracted "That's nice, honey," before returning to his laptop. Jonah, on the other hand, had brought flowers and insisted on toasting my success multiple times throughout the evening. "I can see that," Eliot replied, his tone still unnaturally controlled. His gaze lingered on the wine glasses, the dimmed lights, the cozy scene we'd created. "It's quite late for cleaning." "Time got away from us," I said quickly. "You know how it is when you're catching up with friends." Friends. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. Jonah and I had been flirting for weeks. Stolen conversations in the office break room, lingering text messages, meaningful glances across crowded rooms. Tonight had simply been the culmination of months of building tension. "Right," Eliot said. "Well, Jonah, I'm sure you want to get home. It's been a long day for everyone." It wasn't a suggestion. Jonah picked up on the dismissal immediately, grabbing his jacket and heading for the door. "Absolutely. Thanks for the hospitality, Opaline. See you at work, Eliot." After Jonah left, the silence returned, heavier than before. Eliot methodically locked the door, hung up his keys, and began gathering the empty glasses from the coffee table. His movements were precise, controlled. the same way he approached everything in life. "How was the conference?" I asked, desperate to fill the quiet. "Educational," he replied without looking at me. "I learned quite a bit about documentation, the importance of keeping detailed records, how small details can reveal much larger patterns." Something in his tone made my skin crawl, but I forced a laugh. "Sounds thrilling. I'm glad you're home safe." "Are you?" He finally looked at me directly, and I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Not anger, not hurt, but calculation, because you seemed quite comfortable in my absence. "Don't be ridiculous, Eliot. Jonah is your coworker. We were just talking." "Talking." He repeated the word like he was testing its weight. "Is that what we're calling it?" "What exactly are you implying?" I crossed my arms, shifting into defensive mode. This was familiar territory, Eliot's tendency to overthink and overanalyze everything. "I can't have friends. I can't enjoy adult conversation without you monitoring every word." "Of course you can have friends," he said mildly, loading the glasses into the dishwasher. "I just find it interesting that your friendship with Jonah seems to require such intimate proximity." "You're being paranoid." "Am I?" He closed the dishwasher and turned to face me fully. Because from where I stood, it looked like I interrupted something significant. "You interrupted a conversation between two adults who happened to appreciate each other's company. Something you might try sometime, instead of treating me like I'm part of the furniture." There it was, the accusation I'd been building toward for months. Eliot's emotional distance, his preoccupation with work, his failure to see me as anything more than a household manager and co-parent. "I see," he said quietly. "So this is my fault." "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." He picked up his conference bag and headed toward the hallway. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. We can discuss this when we've both had time to think." "Eliot, wait!" But he was already gone, the guest room door closing with a soft click that somehow sounded more final than if he'd slammed it. I stood alone in our living room, surrounded by the remnants of my celebration party, and realized that everything had changed. The comfortable life I'd built, the secure marriage I'd taken for granted, the careful balance I'd maintained, it was all crumbling because of one moment of weakness, one night when I'd chosen validation over loyalty. But as I climbed the stairs to our empty bedroom, I told myself it wasn't really my fault. If Eliot had been paying attention, if he'd been the husband I needed, none of this would have happened. Jonah had simply filled a void that Eliot had created through his neglect. I was the victim here, not the villain. At least, that's what I told myself as I fell asleep alone, unaware that Eliot was downstairs in the guest room, already beginning to document everything. I woke up the next morning to the sound of the printer running in the guest room. The mechanical whirring seemed unusually loud in our typically quiet apartment, and it had been going on for what sounded like quite some time. I checked my phone, 7:30 a.m. Eliot was usually at work by now, but apparently he'd taken a personal day. After showering and dressing, I found him in the kitchen, methodically preparing breakfast for Lyra, as if nothing had happened. Our daughter sat at the counter, swinging her legs and chattering about her upcoming school field trip, blissfully unaware of the tension crackling between her parents. "Morning," I said carefully, pouring myself coffee from the pot Eliot had already brewed. "Good morning," he replied, without looking up from the scrambled eggs. His tone was polite, distant, the voice he used with strangers or difficult clients. "Daddy came home early," Lyra announced, beaming at me. "He said we can have pancakes for dinner tonight if I'm good at school." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I managed, though my stomach was churning. Eliot never made spontaneous promises like that. He was a creature of routine, careful planning, measured responses. This casual domesticity felt like a performance. "Why don't you go brush your teeth?" Eliot suggested to Lyra. "School starts in 30 minutes. Once she was out of earshot, I tried again. "About last night." "There's nothing to discuss," he interrupted, still not meeting my eyes. You made your position clear. You feel neglected, unappreciated. I understand. His calm acceptance was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. I'd expected accusations, demands for explanations, maybe even a fight that would clear the air. Instead, he was treating me like a problem to be solved, rather than a wife to be confronted. I may have overreacted, I said, though the words felt like swallowing glass. The wine, the stress of the promotion, everything just overreacted to what exactly? Now he did look at me, his green eyes sharp and focused. To having an intimate conversation with my coworker, to entertaining him in our home while our daughter slept upstairs, to seeking comfort from another man instead of your husband. It wasn't like that. Then how was it, Opaline? Help me understand. The way he said my name, with that same clinical detachment, made me want to scream. This wasn't the Eliot I'd married, the gentle man who used to bring me flowers and leave sweet notes in my lunch bag. This version was calculating, controlled, almost robotic in his responses. You've been distant for months, I said, abandoning my conciliatory approach. When was the last time you asked about my day? When did you last tell me I looked beautiful, or take me out for dinner, or show any interest in my life beyond logistics and schedules? I work 60 hours a week to support this family. I handle the bills, the maintenance, the financial planning. I coach Lyra's soccer team and help with her homework every night. If that's not showing interest in your life, I'm not sure what would qualify. That's not what I mean, and you know it. When did you stop seeing me as a woman instead of just a household appliance? Eliot was quiet for a long moment, and I thought I might have finally broken through his strange new composure. Then he nodded slowly, as if I'd confirmed something he'd been thinking. I see, he said. So, because I haven't been sufficiently romantic, you decided to seek romance elsewhere. I didn't seek anything. Jonah was being kind, paying attention. Jonah was pursuing a married woman whose husband was out of town. There's a difference between kindness and opportunism. The accuracy of that statement hit harder than I wanted to admit. Looking back, Jonah's timing had been awfully convenient, offering to help clean up just as the last guests were leaving, suggesting we open another bottle of wine, steering the conversation toward my marriage problems. You're twisting everything, I said instead, making it sound sordid when it was just human connection. Human connection. He repeated my words the same way he'd said talking the night before. Is that what you call it when you're pressed against another man on our couch at 2 a.m? Nothing happened. Something was about to happen. We both know that. He was right, and my silence confirmed it. If he hadn't come home early, if those headlights hadn't swept across the window, I might have crossed a line I could never uncross. The thought terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I need some air, I said, grabbing my purse and heading for the door. Opaline. His voice stopped me at the threshold. I've moved my things to the guest room, permanently. I think it's best if we maintain some distance while we figure out what happens next. What's that supposed to mean? It means I need time to think, and you need time to decide what you really want. I wanted to argue, to demand he stop being so dramatic over what amounted to a moment of weakness. Instead, I left for work, telling myself that Eliot would calm down, and we'd work through this like we always did. But when I came home that evening, I discovered he'd done more than just move his clothes. The guest room door was closed, and I could hear the printer running again. When I tried the handle, I found it locked, something that had never happened in our 8 years of marriage. Daddy's working on a special project, Lyra informed me when I asked. He said not to disturb him unless it's an emergency. A special project. At 8 p.m. on a Tuesday night, behind a locked door, with the printer running constantly. My hands shook as I started dinner, trying to ignore the growing certainty that Eliot's project had everything to do with what he'd witnessed the night before. My phone buzzed with a text from Jonah. Hope everything's okay at home. Let me know if you need to talk. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. Whatever game we'd been playing, whatever boundaries we'd been testing, it was over now. It had to be. But even as I made that resolution, I found myself wondering what would have happened if Eliot hadn't come home early. Would Jonah have kissed me? Would I have let him? Would it have been worth the destruction it would have caused? The printer stopped running around midnight, but the guest room light stayed on until dawn. I lay awake in our empty bed, listening to the soft sounds of Eliot moving around, occasionally typing on his laptop, making phone calls in voices too low for me to understand. By morning, I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. Eliot was methodical by nature, probably just processing his emotions the way he processed everything else, with lists and analysis and careful consideration. He'd work through his hurt feelings, and we'd find our way back to normal. I had no idea that normal was already gone forever, or that Eliot's special project was building a case that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. The first sign came 3 days later, when I tried to check our joint bank account and found my access had been restricted. The second came when I noticed Eliot carrying a small notebook everywhere, occasionally jotting down notes with the focused attention he usually reserved for debugging code. But I didn't understand what was really happening until I glimpsed the cover of that notebook, left open on the kitchen counter while he showered. Chronology, incidents, was written across the top in his precise handwriting. The first entry was dated 3 days ago. 2:07 a.m., Opaline, Jonah, living room, inappropriate physical contact. There were 12 more entries below it, documenting things I didn't even remember. Text messages, phone calls, social media interactions, all involving Jonah, all carefully time-stamped and described in clinical detail. My husband wasn't processing his emotions. He was building a file. The gossip started at Sasha's weekend brunch, the way most of my social destruction began, with wine, whispered confidences, and my best friend's insatiable appetite for drama. I'd been meeting Sasha Graves every Saturday for 3 years, dissecting our lives over mimosas and overpriced avocado toast at Café Luna, our favorite spot downtown. "You look terrible," Sasha announced as I slumped into the booth across from her. "What's going on?" I'd barely slept in a week. Eliot's methodical documentation project had expanded beyond the mysterious notebook. I'd caught glimpses of spreadsheets on his laptop, manila folders organized by date, and a filing system that seemed to catalog every interaction I'd had with Jonah over the past 2 months. "Marriage problems," I said, signaling the waitress for a mimosa. "Eliot's being impossible." "Still mad about the party?" Sasha leaned forward eagerly. She'd left early that night, missing the dramatic finale, but I'd given her a carefully edited version of events. "I told you he was uptight. Remember when he got pissy about you dancing with that guy at Jenny's wedding? This is different. He's acting like I committed some unforgivable sin instead of just having a conversation with a friend." "Jonah's hardly just a friend," Sasha said with a knowing smile. "That man has been circling you like a shark for months. And honestly, good for you. Eliot takes you completely for granted." This was exactly what I needed to hear. Validation that I wasn't crazy, that Eliot's reaction was disproportionate, that I deserved better treatment than I'd been getting. "Right?" I said, feeling the familiar rush of righteous indignation. "I work full-time, manage most of Lyra's schedule, handle all the social planning, and what do I get?" Silence. He treats me like a roommate, not a wife. "Meanwhile, Jonah actually sees you," Sasha continued, warming to the theme. "He appreciates your intelligence, your sense of humor, your accomplishments. When was the last time Eliot celebrated your success?" He didn't even congratulate me properly on the promotion, just nodded and went back to his computer. "Exactly. And now he's punishing you for finding someone who actually values you. It's emotional abuse, honestly." Emotional abuse. The phrase resonated in a way that surprised me. Was that what this was? The cold silence, the locked door, the constant note-taking, the restricted bank access. Maybe Eliot's response was more sinister than I'd realized. "I should probably talk to someone," I said. "Get some perspective." "You should talk to Jonah," Sasha suggested. "He's probably worried about you. And if Eliot's going to act like you're having an affair anyway, you might as well enjoy the benefits." The idea was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. Jonah had been texting sporadically since the party, careful messages asking about my well-being, offering support. I'd been ignoring them, but maybe that was a mistake. Maybe I was letting Eliot's paranoia dictate my behavior when I should be taking control of my own narrative. "I don't want to make things worse," I said, though the protest felt weak even to me. "How could they get worse? He's already treating you like the enemy. At least this way, you'd have someone in your corner." By the time we finished brunch, I was feeling significantly better about my situation. Sasha was right. I was the injured party here, not Eliot. His overreaction to an innocent friendship was revealing his true character, and I deserved support during this difficult time. I texted Jonah on the way home. "Coffee tomorrow. Could use a friendly ear." His response came within minutes. "Of course. Starbucks on 5th at 2. "Perfect. Thank you for being such a good friend." "Always here for you, beautiful." The endearment sent a warm flutter through my chest. When was the last time Eliot had called me beautiful? When had he last made me feel desired, appreciated, seen? Sunday's coffee date stretched into a 3-hour conversation that felt like therapy. Jonah listened with focused attention as I detailed Eliot's bizarre behavior, his documentation obsession, his emotional withdrawal from our family. "He's trying to control you," Jonah said, reaching across the small table to squeeze my hand. "Making you question your own perceptions, isolating you from support systems. It's textbook manipulation." "I keep thinking I must have done something wrong," I admitted. "Like maybe I was sending mixed signals or—" "Stop." His grip tightened. "You were being yourself, warm, engaging, alive. If your husband can't handle other people appreciating those qualities, that's his insecurity, not your fault. He used to be different, more attentive, more affectionate." People change. Sometimes they reveal who they really are underneath all the pretense. Maybe this is the real Eliot. Controlling, suspicious, emotionally unavailable. The conversation felt revelatory, like puzzle pieces clicking into place. I'd been blaming myself for the deterioration of my marriage, but what if the problem was Eliot's fundamental inability to appreciate what he had? "What should I do?" I asked. "Live your life," Jonah said simply. "Don't let his paranoia turn you into a prisoner in your own home. You deserve friendship, support, happiness, all the things he's trying to deny you." When I got home that evening, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Eliot was in the kitchen helping Lyra with a school project, both of them bent over construction paper and glue sticks. The scene looked peaceful, normal, like maybe we could find our way back to equilibrium. "How was your day?" he asked without looking up. "Good. Had coffee with a friend, did some shopping, caught up on errands." "Which friend?" The question was casual, but something in his tone made me hesitate. "Just someone from work, nothing exciting." He nodded and returned his attention to Lyra's project, but I caught him making a note in his ever-present notebook a few minutes later. That night, I made a decision that would accelerate everything. I posted a photo on social media, just a simple shot of my coffee cup and a book, captioned, "Sunday Self-Care," with a wonderful friend who actually listens, feeling grateful for people who see and appreciate the real me. It was subtle, I told myself, a gentle assertion of independence, a reminder that I had value outside my marriage, nothing inappropriate or inflammatory. I had no idea that within 24 hours, that post would be screenshot, analyzed, and discussed by half our social circle. Or that Eliot would print it out and add it to his growing file, labeled Exhibit C, Social Media Manipulation. The real explosion came on Monday at work. I was grabbing coffee in the break room when I overheard two colleagues from accounting whispering near the vending machines. Saw the post. Pretty obvious what's going on there. I feel bad for the husband. Eliot seems like such a nice guy. She's not even trying to be discreet. Did you see her having lunch with Jonah last week? They were practically... They stopped talking when they noticed me, but the damage was done. The gossip had started, spreading through our office like wildfire. By noon, I'd received 3 concerned texts from mutual friends and a passive-aggressive email from HR about maintaining professional boundaries in the workplace. I was furious. How dare people judge my private life based on speculation and rumors? How dare they paint me as some kind of adulteress when I'd done nothing wrong? But underneath the anger was a growing realization that the situation was spiraling beyond my control. What had started as a moment of weakness was becoming a public scandal, and I wasn't sure how to stop it. That evening, I found Eliot in the guest room with his laptop open, reviewing what looked like printed screenshots of social media posts, not just mine, but comments from friends, reactions, shares. He was cataloguing everything, building a comprehensive record of my public humiliation. "Enjoying yourself?" I asked from the doorway. He looked up calmly. "Just staying informed. It's amazing what people will put in writing when they think they're being supportive." "This is sick, Eliot. You're documenting my life like I'm some kind of criminal." "I'm protecting my family," he said simply, "making sure I understand exactly what's happening before I decide how to respond." "Nothing is happening. You're creating a crisis out of nothing." "Am I?" He turned the laptop screen toward me. "Because according to your social media presence, your coffee dates with my coworker, and the office gossip that's reached even my department, something is definitely happening. The only question is how much." I stared at the evidence he'd compiled. Screenshots, timestamps, witness accounts, a digital paper trail that made my innocent friendship look like a calculated affair. It was masterful in its thoroughness, devastating in its implications. "You're destroying our marriage over nothing," I whispered. "No, Opaline," he said quietly. "You did that. I'm just making sure I have proof." The confrontation with my mother-in-law came on a Tuesday evening when I least expected it. I was picking up Lyra from soccer practice, chatting with other parents about the upcoming team pizza party, when Miriam Varel appeared beside me with the purposeful stride of a woman on a mission. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. Miriam had never liked me, not since Eliot first brought me home 8 years ago. She'd made polite conversation at family gatherings, remembered my birthday, and treated me with cordial civility, but I'd always sensed her disapproval lurking beneath the surface. She thought I wasn't good enough for her precious son, that I was too social, too ambitious, too demanding of attention. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "How are you, Miriam?" "Concerned about my brother," she replied bluntly, "and my niece. Can we speak privately?" We walked away from the cluster of parents, stopping near the parking lot where our conversation wouldn't be overheard. Miriam was a smaller woman than me, barely 5'4", but she had Eliot's sharp intelligence and a directness that could be intimidating. "Eliot called me last week," she began. "He's worried about you, about your marriage, about some poor choices you've been making." My defenses went up immediately. "I'm sure he gave you his version of events." "He gave me facts, dates, times, witnesses. He's very thorough, as you know." "He's being paranoid and controlling. I had coffee with a friend, and he's acting like I committed adultery." Miriam studied me with those same green eyes Eliot had inherited. "Is that really all it was? Coffee with a friend?" The question hung between us, loaded with implications. I could lie, maintain the fiction that nothing inappropriate had happened, but something in Miriam's expression told me she already knew more than she was saying. "My marriage is none of your business," I said instead. "It became my business when it started affecting my granddaughter. Lyra's teacher called yesterday. She's been acting out in class, Seems anxious and distracted. She asked the counselor if her parents were getting divorced. The words hit like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on managing the adult drama that I hadn't considered how it might be impacting Lyra. She was a sensitive child, prone to picking up on emotional undercurrents, even when we thought we were hiding them. "We're working through some issues," I said carefully. "All couples do. Not all couples have one spouse pursuing someone else while the other documents evidence for legal proceedings." Legal proceedings. The phrase sent ice through my veins. "What are you talking about?" "Eliot's consulting an attorney, Opaline. He's been advised to keep detailed records of any indiscretions in case he needs them later." The parking lot seemed to tilt around me. This wasn't just about Eliot's hurt feelings or his need to process emotions through organization. He was building a case for divorce, documenting grounds for infidelity, protecting his interests in a potential custody battle. "That's ridiculous," I managed. "I haven't done anything that would warrant legal action." "Haven't you?" Miriam's voice was gentle but implacable. "Because from what I understand, you've been having an emotional affair with his coworker for months. You entertained this man in your home while your husband was away and your daughter was sleeping upstairs. You've been meeting him secretly, posting about him on social media, and allowing him to undermine your marriage. It's not like that. Then what is it like? Help me understand how a wife and mother ends up in this situation." I wanted to explain about the loneliness, the feeling of being invisible in my own home, the way Jonah made me feel alive and appreciated in ways Eliot had forgotten. But looking at Miriam's stern expression, I realized how selfish and pathetic those justifications would sound. "Eliot stopped seeing me," I said quietly. "Stopped trying. I felt like I was disappearing." "So you decided to find validation elsewhere instead of fighting for your marriage?" "I was fighting. I tried talking to him, tried getting his attention, tried everything I could think of. He was completely checked out. And now he's documenting every breath I take like I'm some kind of criminal. He's moved into the guest room, restricted my access to our accounts, and apparently he's building a legal case against me. How is that fighting for our marriage?" Miriam was quiet for a long moment, watching Lyra run around the soccer field with her teammates, oblivious to the adult drama surrounding her. "He's protecting himself," she said finally, "and his daughter. Can you blame him?" "I'm not a threat to Lyra." "Aren't you? You're modeling infidelity, dishonesty, and selfishness. You're teaching her that marriage vows are conditional, that commitment only matters when it's convenient. What kind of lesson is that?" The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to be devastating. I had been dishonest, if not about actions, then about intentions. I had been prioritizing my own needs over my family's stability, and I had been justifying it all with a narrative that cast me as the victim rather than the perpetrator. "I never meant for any of this to happen," I said, "but it did happen, and now you have to decide what you're going to do about it." "What do you mean?" "End it," Miriam said simply. "Whatever you have with this Jonah person, end it completely. Delete his number, avoid him at work, make it clear that you're committed to your marriage. Then get counseling, both individual and couples therapy. Fight for your family instead of fighting against it. And if I do all that, will Eliot stop treating me like the enemy?" "I don't know. The trust is broken, Opaline. It might take years to rebuild, if it can be rebuilt at all. But it's your only chance." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Miriam's words echoing in my head. Legal proceedings, evidence, custody battle. The comfortable life I'd taken for granted was crumbling, and I was running out of time to stop the collapse. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my text messages with Jonah. Dozens of conversations over the past 2 months, escalating from friendly banter to intimate confessions to something that definitely crossed the line of appropriate friendship. If Eliot had access to these messages, and given his thoroughness, he probably did, they would be damning evidence in any legal proceeding. My finger hovered over Jonah's contact information. I could delete everything, block his number, pretend none of it had ever happened, start over with a clean slate, and hope Eliot would be willing to work on our marriage. But even as I considered it, I felt a surge of resentment. Why should I have to give up the one person who made me feel valued and appreciated? Why should I have to apologize for seeking connection when my own husband had emotionally abandoned me? Instead of deleting Jonah's number, I sent him a message. "Can we talk tomorrow? I need advice about something important." His response came within minutes. "Of course, whatever you need." I fell asleep with the phone clutched in my hand, telling myself I was just keeping my options open. I had no idea that Eliot was in the guest room below, watching the data usage on our shared phone plan, documenting the timestamp of my late-night message, adding another entry to his growing file. The next morning, I woke up to find a manila envelope on the kitchen counter with my name written across it in Eliot's precise handwriting. Inside were copies of bank statements, credit card records, phone logs, and a letter from a family law attorney outlining the process for legal separation. At the bottom, in Eliot's handwriting, was a simple note: "Your choice." I was running out of time to make it. The family dinner at my mother's house was supposed to be a normal Sunday gathering, the kind of weekly tradition that had anchored our lives for years. My mother, Martine Rhodes, had been hosting these dinners since Lyra was born, insisting that family time was sacred regardless of whatever petty disagreements might be happening between the adults. I should have cancelled, should have made excuses about work or Lyra's schedule or anything that would have kept us away from my mother's dining room table, where every tension would be magnified under the warm light of her antique chandelier. But I was desperate for normalcy, for witnesses to confirm that we were still a functional family, despite the growing cracks in our foundation. Eliot had been coldly polite when I suggested we attend together. "Of course," he'd said in that new measured tone he'd adopted. "We wouldn't want to worry your mother with our personal issues." The drive to my mother's house was silent except for Lyra's chatter from the back seat about her upcoming school play. She was playing a tree in the third-grade production of The Seasons, and she'd been practicing her swaying motions for weeks. Her innocent excitement was a stark contrast to the tension radiating between her parents in the front seat. My mother greeted us at the door with her usual enthusiasm, hugging Lyra first and longest before turning her attention to Eliot and me. Martine Rhodes was a woman who believed that most problems could be solved with enough food and forceful optimism. She'd been divorced twice herself, but that had only reinforced her conviction that marriage required constant work and occasional strategic blindness. "You look tired, sweetheart," she said to me, studying my face with maternal concern. "Are you getting enough sleep?" "Just busy with work," I replied, avoiding Eliot's glance. "The new promotion has been demanding." "Well, you deserve every bit of success you get," my mother declared, shooting a pointed look at Eliot. "I hope your husband is properly appreciating all your hard work." Dinner conversation started safely enough. Lyra's school activities, my mother's garden, Eliot's latest project at work. But I could feel the undercurrents building, the way they always did when my mother decided someone needed defending, and that someone was me. "Opaline tells me you've been working late a lot," my mother said to Eliot as she passed the roast. "I hope you're not neglecting your family responsibilities." "I work standard hours," Eliot replied evenly, 40 to 50 hours a week, depending on project deadlines. My mother's disapproval was subtle but unmistakable. "Well, marriage is about more than just paying bills. A woman needs attention, appreciation, romance. She needs to feel valued." I felt heat creep up my neck. This was exactly the kind of conversation I'd been hoping to avoid. My mother's none-too-subtle criticism of Eliot's perceived shortcomings as a husband. "Mom, please," I said quietly. "I'm just saying, if a woman feels neglected, she might start looking elsewhere for the attention she deserves. And who could blame her?" The silence that followed was deafening. Lyra continued eating, oblivious to the adult tension, but Eliot's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. When he looked at me, his expression was unreadable. "Are you speaking from experience, Martine?" he asked politely. "About looking elsewhere for attention?" My mother bristled. "I'm speaking from the experience of watching my daughter settle for less than she deserves. Opaline is a beautiful, intelligent, accomplished woman. She should be celebrated, not taken for granted." "I agree completely," Eliot said. "She's remarkable in every way. I'm very fortunate to be married to her." The words should have been gratifying, but his tone was so flat, so obviously performative, that they felt like mockery instead of praise. "Then act like it," my mother snapped. "When was the last time you took her out for dinner? Bought her flowers? Told her she was beautiful?" "Mom, stop," I said more firmly. "This isn't appropriate." "It's perfectly appropriate. You're my daughter, and I won't sit here and watch you fade away in a marriage that doesn't appreciate your worth." Eliot set down his fork and looked directly at my mother. "What exactly are you suggesting I should do differently?" "Pay attention to her. Show interest in her life. Stop treating her like a roommate and start treating her like a wife." "I see." Eliot nodded thoughtfully. "And if I fail to provide sufficient attention, that would justify her seeking it elsewhere." The question hung in the air like a challenge. My mother's eyes narrowed, sensing the trap but unable to resist walking into it. "A woman has needs," she said defensively. "Emotional needs, romantic needs. If her husband won't meet them, then adultery becomes acceptable." "I didn't say adultery." "What did you say then?" "That looking elsewhere for attention is understandable. That neglect justifies infidelity. That a woman's emotional needs supersede her marriage vows." My mother's face flushed crimson. "Don't twist my words." "I'm not," Eliot said evenly. "I'm just trying to understand where you learned that betrayal is acceptable if you can frame it as someone else's fault." "Eliot," I snapped, "enough." He turned to me, expression unreadable. "It's revealing, Opaline. The attitudes that shaped your view of marriage, fidelity, responsibility." The accusation landed like a slap. My mother gasped. Lyra looked up, confused. The fragile pretense of normalcy shattered. "How dare you?" my mother hissed. "Get out of my house." Eliot stood, folded his napkin precisely. "Thank you for dinner. It was educational." To Lyra, "Finish eating. Your mother will drive you home." He left. The ride back was torture. Lyra's quiet questions, my evasive answers. The next day at work, HR summoned me mid-meeting. Janet Morrison slid screenshots across the desk. Flirtatious texts with Jonah, sent during office hours. Complaints about Eliot, intimate confessions. "You're on administrative leave pending investigation," she said. "Clear your desk." The walk of shame through the office burned. Colleagues stared. I packed my life into a cardboard box while Jonah, now conveniently transferred and silent, disappeared. At home, Eliot sat surrounded by files, calm as ever. "You did this," I said. "You told them." "I didn't report you, but when people asked about my wife and my coworker, I told the truth." "You destroyed my career." "You destroyed your career." I refused to help hide it. I stared at the man who'd once loved me completely. "What happened to us?" "You stopped choosing me," he said simply. "Everything since has been consequence." "Is it too late?" I whispered. He considered. "It would require full accountability, no excuses, no contact with Jonah, acceptance that some damage can't be undone." He walked to the guest room and closed the door softly. That night, on the balcony with wine and city lights, I finally saw myself clearly. Not the misunderstood wife, but the woman who'd traded commitment for validation and lost everything when the thrill vanished. For the first time, I didn't reach for another excuse. I just sat with the truth, heavy and undeniable. The envelope arrived Thursday morning via process server. I signed with shaking hands, then leaned against the closed door, staring at the thick manila packet that would end my marriage. Inside, Eliot's petition for dissolution, citing irreconcilable differences, requesting joint custody. But the supporting documents were devastating, a meticulous dossier of my emotional affair with Jonah. Texts, emails, late-night neighbor sightings, financial traces of lunches and gifts, social media speculation, HR suspension records, even Lyra's teacher noting her behavioral changes. A clinical timeline charted my relationship's escalation alongside our marriage's collapse. Every excuse I'd told myself lay exposed and indefensible. My mother called, shocked by the news via Miriam. "It's just a friendship," she insisted. I finally admitted the truth. It was an emotional affair. I betrayed our vows in every way but physical, and I nearly crossed that line too. That evening, after Miriam took Lyra to dinner, Eliot and I faced each other across the kitchen table. "You've been thorough," I said. "Facts are reliable," he replied calmly. "You lied, gaslit me, involved others, showed no real remorse until the consequences arrived." He didn't hate me, just hurt, angry, and done. Trust, once shattered, couldn't be rebuilt on the same foundation. He'd already found an apartment and would move out by weekend. Custody, weeknights with me, weekends with him. A protected college fund for Lyra. Jonah had vanished the moment consequences appeared. 3 months later, alone in our former home, now mine, I wrote Eliot an unsent letter, acknowledging every failure, every selfish choice. 6 months on, the divorce finalized. 2 years later, Eliot remarried a kind pediatric nurse in the same park where we'd wed. Lyra said he looked happier than ever. I rebuilt slowly. New job, therapy, fragile friendships, honest motherhood. I never remarried, but I learned the hardest truth: self-deception is the most dangerous lie, and only raw accountability offers any hope of redemption. Eliot had been right about everything.